just to follow on from Tammy, because she made some very salient points here. But yes, to Joanna's point, I'm a threat hunter, I'm an incident responder, so I'm a geek. I just dress like this to blend in, okay? I will say, though, that the COVID fog means that I have to have something to read from, so please forgive me, because, times have changed, and I've taught myself to use notes now. Somebody did wish me well and said break a leg, so I'm likely to fall off the stage. If I do, somebody please come and get me, okay? So the reason why I'm talking about zero trust and hype and hope, and yet again, okay, is because zero trust is actually the #1 security priority. And I want to break through some of the hype that's out there, leave you with some of the hope, because essentially what has happened is that there's so many misconceptions, there's so much hype out there that, it's really slowed down adoption, and that's not a good thing, okay? If you want hope right off the bat, our zero trust architecture is actually what saved us from SolarWinds. Okay, is that enough? Is that okay? You guys can leave now. I've given you all the best bits, all right? But essentially, my recommendation from that is to protect your administrator accounts, put the controls where the controls are required. Don't try and boil the ocean, which I'll get onto in a little bit. But there is another key theme I want to explore, which is that of digital empathy. And simply because the problem that we see, and having been doing this for a very long time, is that we've tried to train our users to be security professionals. We're trying to train them to be technologists, right? To the point of, what about my parents? Well, the problem I'm seeing is that there is almost a reluctance to use technology now. So, because fundamentally, if I click on something, what's going to happen? Am I going to end up giving myself a piece of malware, right? So that's the side effects and the consequences that we've had over all the years of trying to teach people to be careful and to think about technology as bad, right? So I want to get to the point where we stop blaming the user, and we start thinking about putting the controls where they're required, but having that platform of signal, almost to Tammy's self-healing point, which is to say, if a user clicks on that evil phishing email attack, that fundamentally the underlying technology protects her or him from the consequences of doing that, all right? So we really want to be thinking about moving to balance security with security productivity or secure productivity, and not overlaying so many controls. Something we saw during the pandemic, which was a lot of security controls being put over the top of people's bring your own devices or working from home, and it just made it a complete nightmare for people. So we want to be thinking about being empathetic as part of our technology strategy. So when we talk about digital empathy, and yet we say zero trust in the same sentence, how many of you think of that as being an empathetic term, right? No, because zero trust, and in fact, there's not many customers I know that I work with who actually use the term zero trust to their employees, because essentially it could damage the culture from the point of view of the organization, because simply, they start to feel like maybe we, as organizations, don't have any trust in our employees, and that's not where we want to be, okay? So we want to be thinking about, in fact, in some cases, we call it, back to the lead slide, that zero implicit trust, the fact that we are talking about explicit trust. But back in 2013, inside Microsoft, we actually called it identity-driven security. And I'm a little upset, actually, that the industry as a whole prefers the term zero trust, again, because of that digital empathy that we really want to be driving. So in fact, in 1995, all those many years ago, there was a Harvard Business Review article where one author wrote, virtuality requires trust to make it work. Technology on its own is not enough. So as organizations, we should be thinking about that culture of care in which that key pillar of trust, in terms of zero trust, is digital empathy, or user experience, if you prefer, okay? Beyond that, zero trust is not a bunch of things. It's not a monolithic security paradigm. It's modular, tech-agnostic security model, and it's a good one, actually, apart from the name. But start with what you have inside the organization. Don't try to eat the elephant or boil the ocean if you would prefer it all at once. Pick small wins based on what you have already. For example, my strongest recommendations back to the SolarWinds attack that we had is think about putting the controls around your administrators. Or if you still want your users going via VPN to connect into your organization, heaven forbid, use use MFA, multi-factor authentication, to allow them to have access. And in fact, multi-factor authentication is the easiest way to start. Okay? So, what is it? It's, as I said, it's not a single technology, it's not even a bunch of tech. Fundamentally, it's a holistic approach to security that incorporates several different principles and technologies. You have to start with the assumption that attackers are everywhere, right? They're internal to the network, they're external to the network, so no user's machine should be automatically trusted. But that trust also needs to be continuously assessed. So, for example, just because we granted access to somebody this morning doesn't mean to say that 2 hours later, when they're trying to get to something that they shouldn't be trying to get to, that we continue to trust them. We assess them based on what they are doing and make the determination, do we ask them for a multi-factor authentication prompt? Do we deny them access to the resources that they're trying to get? But anyway, it's an ongoing journey, and it's something that we need to do as we go through. So given that failure conditions are inevitable, what we want to do is fail safe, and we want to fail loud, right? We want to make sure that we detect when people are doing something inside the organization that we don't want them doing. But we also want our defenders and our controls to limit the blast radius, right, to protect the organization. So this brings us to the principles upon which we built our zero trust architecture. And we start off with identity as being the new control plane. But I just want to take a little bit of a step back and think about what authentication is. What are we trying to prove? And that's simply that the user with a digital identity who is requesting access actually owns that identity. So it's very much like going to the airport with your passport, right? There's a pattern there. It follows that pattern of ask, act, and validate. The border guard says to you, "Can I see your passport, please?" You hand over your passport, he validates who you are, he lets you in. Okay? So that's very much what we see from the point of view of authentication. So we started with identities because, and I suppose this is a little bit of where the flavors come in. Some people start from the network, some people start from identities. We start from identities purely because that's what the attackers are going after. But we want to be thinking about those continuous signals across the 6 pillars of identities, endpoint, data, which is key and which I'll spend a little bit of time on during the rest of this, the applications, the infrastructure that we have, and the network are all used to inform, compare, contrast, and ultimately be acted upon automatically. But that those signals and those decisions that we are making are aligned against our organization's policy and government's requirements. Make sense? You have to say yes, I'm looking at you. So second, zero trust assumes an open environment. Okay, access must be validated. It's all about operating as if you are in a pervasive threat environment, and today we know that we are. Okay. But we also don't want to trust a single source, right? Single source of information potentially means that we make a decision which isn't the right decision. As an example, I had a company a couple of years ago who just, no, in fact, a little bit older than that, when anonymous was still a thing. They seem to be coming back a little bit, but who made the decision when they had a threat from anonymous to attack them that they were going to take themselves off the internet. Okay, 1-0 to anonymous, right? They achieved their objective without ever lifting a finger. So on the other hand, we might actually even miss a single signal, that's easy for me to say, a single signal, right, with all of the data that we have and the huge amount of signal set that we have to analyze, we might miss it altogether, right? Especially when we're looking at those cross-service, multi-stage attack that we are seeing today. And there aren't enough humans, right? I'm always spoken to about, how do we increase the number of people inside our Cyber Defense Operations Center? And frankly, I think that this is a bit of a black hole, right? There aren't enough humans on the planet, even if you train them all to be security people, which wouldn't really work, but anyway, thinking of my parents again. But there aren't enough humans to be able to throw at the problem. So we need to be thinking about technology and what technology can do from us as a going forward. So currently at the moment, we're searching for those unicorns, those few people who have the skills, the experience, the curiosity, and the stamina to be defenders. If you want to have some war stories, myself and my friend and colleague at the back there, Alan Miller, will quite happily have these war stories with you afterwards. But in order for us to grow our pipeline, instead, we want to look for passionate, curious people and teach them to be security people. Right? We don't need them to come out of university fully clothed as a security person. We can teach them the language, and that's important. But of course, standards equal security as far as we're concerned, right? A standard is a repeatable, harmonized, agreed, and documented way to doing something. Or if you prefer the ISO definition, standards are the distilled wisdom, and I'm quoting, of people with expertise in their subject matter. Okay. But you don't have to install Wi-Fi today, for example, right? It comes as standard. So people don't have to do one-off things. Therefore, if you're building software or hardware to a set of standard specifications, it means that security is built in, not bolted on after the fact, which we all know doesn't really work. Okay, so zero trust through a clearer lens, hopefully. We took some of those principles that I've just touched on, we distilled them down into verify explicitly, use least privileged access, and assume breach or compromise. And why do I make the distinction between breach and compromise? Simply because breach is a legal requirement to notify if you lose PII. Of course, you'll see the industry talk about assume breach. I personally prefer assume compromise because it means that there's somebody inside our network as opposed to thinking about my legal obligation to notify if I've lost PII. You'll also see a lot of news stories that talk about companies being breached, which doesn't mean to say that they've actually had loss of PII. Okay? So hopefully that this puts us in a clearer light. Have I succeeded? Yay. Okay, so for the next part of the discussion, what we want to do is look at what data and modern technology can do for us, touching again on Tammy's presentation a little bit earlier. Okay. I drew this myself. So earlier I mentioned that data and how key it is, right? It's key to the attackers, it's key to the organization, it's key to digital transformation. But not any old data, and not all the data, by the way, especially as incident responders and defenders, we seem to want to have everything that we worry about whether we're going to miss the signal in that data set. But today, I think with the zettabytes of data, I've seen different reports that say we're at 174 zettabytes of information or 186 zettabytes of information. Anyway, I think it's clear enough that big data is here to stay, all right? But how do we use it strategically to gain insights from a business perspective whilst we protect it from attackers, right? And that's obviously loss of valuable business information that we have there. So at Microsoft, we have a lot of telemetry. We have a lot of visibility. We have data that's coming through all of the listening systems that we have, and I'll show you that in the next slide. But the one observability at Microsoft is a strategic initiative to unify all of those systems to bring insights across the organization, all right? So instead of us siloing the information to different business units, let's think about how we can get this in as a platform and then just use different lenses across that data to be able to say, you know, is it a security issue? Is there a health problem on the Azure fabric, heaven forbid, all right? But those are the sort of things that we want to be thinking about. So here we go, petabytes of logs and trillions of metrics a day. All right. Can you imagine a human being looking through all of this, sifting through for those little security signals that mean that we've been compromised? No, okay? We'd burn out our defenders in double quick time, so we don't want to be doing that. And generally what we do normally is that we will curate it, we will normalize it, we will apply taxonomy, and we push it down to the various business units, okay? That frankly becomes very difficult to do at extremely large data sets. So what we're trying to achieve is moving away from those static taxonomies to be thinking about dynamic ontologies which change depending on the relationship and the context to each other, and then making those determinations from that perspective. Apparently, I'm told context is king. And essentially what we're trying to get to, of course, is observability on top of monitoring. And I often hear about, is it observability or monitoring. No, you can't have them separately. It's all or nothing, okay? You have to have the monitoring first, and then you have observability on top of that monitoring. So for example, monitoring can tell you what is wrong, whereas observability is there to tell you why it's going wrong. Right? Make sense? And definitely say it better together. So it must be consistent and it must be comprehensive, but it also has to be cost effective because it can't cost more than the value it's bringing as to the organization as data, okay? And it has to be compliant, especially given the fact that we are, in terms of GDPR, and we've got the privacy of personal data requirements today. So nowadays, with the rapid growth of AI and ML, right, artificial intelligence and machine learning, I'm going to do a little bit of debunking on that as well, we can move beyond the traditional business intelligence and essentially diagnostics, okay? We want to be thinking about advanced analytics and where we may go next in terms of the attacker and being predictive about it, right? But it means exposing more of those unknown unknowns where, in fact, what you don't know can actually hurt you, all right? But it also means from a security perspective, we want to be thinking about anomaly detection instead of indicators of compromise, which are very useful inside an incident response for about 5 minutes, and then they move on, okay? But there's obviously a lot of focus for them because it means that we can quickly tell if we've been compromised. Beyond that, the attackers change their tools, their techniques and procedures, their TTPs, very quickly after initial attack. So we want to be thinking about those dynamic ontologies and the relationships plus the scale of the cloud to help us realize the benefits of something like an analytics continuum, okay? This would bring, obviously, huge benefits to the business and to security. To Tammy's point, we'd probably start now thinking about the self-healing systems, okay? But we can also think of benefits to the user experience. As I mentioned before, that platform of signals that allows us to very quickly determine what's going on, but also if that user does click on that evil phishing email attack, then there's a bunch of technology underneath it that actually prevents them from being compromised. And in fact, our CISO, Brett Arsenal, he likes to refer to security as being a little bit like an airbag in a car. And I think it's an interesting analogy, right? So what he's basically saying is, you know it's there. If you're going to have a crash, it deploys when you need it to, but actually, other than that, it's out of the way. It doesn't get in the way of your driving. What do we think? We like it? I'll tell him. I'll tell him you said no. But in fact, inside Microsoft, we then have to be thinking about where is AI and the machine learning, right? Which systems are we using it in? Because that is a concern then for our responsible AI decision, our responsible AI department, right, in terms of them making a decision about what it is that we need to do about it. So the short answer, of course, is pervasive. It is. There's a couple of key components. For example, if I'm thinking about security AI or ML, thinking about those controls, they would be, for example, in Defender for Azure, or Azure Defender as we call it today, all right? The ability to stitch together those signals very quickly, of course, relies on machine learning and artificial intelligence. So essentially what we want to be able to do is we have to concern ourselves with the fact that no harm is done. So back to ethics, back to fairness, back to thinking about what the machine learning is doing, and is it something that we should be using machine learning for, or just because we can, should we, and move away from it, right? And of course, we have artificial intelligence, adversarial machine learning, which is something that the attackers are very focused on, and we have a whole team of people dedicated to be thinking about how we prevent the bad guys from poisoning these models or trying to otherwise change them, all right? But AI can do exciting things, okay? But regardless of the technology, as I said, we want it to be fair, we want it to be responsible, we want it to be ethical, okay? But also, if you're thinking about AI in this context, we're actually talking about a range of different technologies here, okay? And I always hear people talk about AI in security. To be clear, at this point, we're talking about machine learning, which is algorithms, all right? And mostly we're referring to artificial narrow intelligence as opposed to artificial general intelligence. So if you want to have a look into that in more detail, then I recommend that you go off and look at Diana Kelly's. There's some public talks out there that you can have a look at that. Okay. On the flip side, I'm actually often asked whether or not tech will take our jobs. Now, whilst I personally would love to be sitting in the Bahamas with my feet in that water, I don't think that this is going to happen anytime soon. I've yet to find machine learning which can grow a gut feel or just feel that something's wrong. All right? Maybe that's something that happens when we're talking about artificial superintelligence, maybe for another day, but I'm not sure about that one. But of course, security is a prime candidate for benefits of the technology that we have today. Okay. So this is some of the taking all of the data that we had in terms of the slide I showed you earlier. These are some of the figures that essentially ends up inside our cyber defense operations center. And that is, there are over 24 trillion signals that come in on a daily basis. Like I said, there's no human being who ever looks at that, all right? Does that scare people? Yeah, all this data, and there's no way that we look at it. So essentially, we have a 90% true positive. In fact, it's gone up. It's gone up to 91% true positive rate. That means as the signal goes through machine learning, until it makes the determination that this is a 91% true positive rate, no human looks at that, okay? At least in terms of our alerting capability and our hot path hunting. Our cold path hunting is another story, and we can have a conversation on another day. But yes, so we have 8,500 security engineers and researchers. That does not mean to say that they all do incident response. Otherwise, I would be sitting in the Bahamas with my feet in the sea. So it turns out that this is a problem industry-wide. It's something that we're obviously very focused on. Again, we want our employees, we want our defenders to not burn out. And this is a key problem that we have in the industry, because as fast as we can recruit people, we lose people, okay? And there are some statistics. This here is from the Logarithms 2020 report on the state of cybersecurity. But in fact, VMware did one back in 2021, which shows very much the same standards, which is essentially is 51% of people, defenders are actually burning out, okay, over the last year. So that's not a good thing. We don't want to be in that state. So yes, SecOps loves cloud and SecML. Right? Had to get a heart in there somewhere. But essentially, when we're thinking about the three pillars of the human-led design, right, what we're trying to achieve is, as I said already, is the appropriate technology needs to blend seamlessly to ensure that they are working for us and not the other way around, right? To be able to balance that human machine or human technology problem. So we want to be thinking about inclusive design when we're talking about software and hardware, okay? Build it in. It's something that then becomes transparent to the end user, and they don't necessarily then feel the pain of trying to use something that wasn't made for humans, but made by technologists for humans to make humans turn into technologists. Does that make sense? But essentially, here's an anti-pattern for you. Because over the years of being a security professional, we've gone through the point of, well, people are using their dogs' names, or I love you, which was a virus as well. Coincidence? Maybe not. But essentially, over the years, we've tried to train people that simple passwords are not the right thing for them to be able to use. Okay, so here's all of the things that you have on the left-hand side. And this is the sort of password that you potentially come up with. It's not usable, it's not rememberable, but actually it turns out it doesn't even matter, because even if you're using a simple password, if you're using complex passwords, if you're using a phrase in Klingon, all right, there are ways for the attackers to be able to get your password. And in fact, 99% of the attacks that we see come through the fact that people use a single password for them to be able to authenticate, which is why we say multi-factor authentication decreases your security risk in your organization by 99%. Straight correlation, all right? Yes, passwords. So we started our password list journey a couple of years ago now. And I have hordes of people running to me at Microsoft going, oh, we loved our passwords, can you bring them back? No. They don't, right? They love the fact that it's passwordless, the fact that they're using a human-centric gesture to be able to get access to the equipment and access to the data that they need. Right? So if there's one thing you can take away from this talk, it's thinking about implementing passwordless for your users. They will love you, right? You will become a cool kid from a security perspective, from an organization perspective. So zero trust, just to wrap up really, it assumes an open environment where trust must be validated. It's a framework, culture, and philosophy, not a technical solution. It's got to be variable trust where context is important, and we've got to be thinking about it as a journey, not a destination, right? But of course, everybody loves an architecture. If you want me to walk you through this, here we go. I'm just showing you that this is, in fact, a policy-driven architecture that takes into account those 6 pillars I mentioned in the beginning, which is the users' identities, whether they're carbon or silicon, thinking about the endpoints, your data apps, infrastructure, your network, but surrounding a policy of governance and control, all right? This is what saved us from SolarWinds. Here we go, take photos and go and replicate it. But here's some zero trust resources for you that you can do some light reading on after the fact if you fancy some bedtime reading. But I would point out the zero trust report that we did as we went through the pandemic and the lockdown ourselves. We produced a report of our key takeaways. Number 1, user experience, right? And there's another 6 on that. Want to leave you with the thought of the day, which is behind every great AI, there's a great human. Okay? And that's it from me. Thank you for listening. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Lesley. That was a great session. Does anybody have any questions for Lesley on the subject in the room? Yes? Can you just wait for the mic? Thank you. And introduce yourself as well, please.
So my name's Ben Steer. I'm the CTO of Pometry, which is a data analytics company based around the corner from here. Some of the numbers that you're putting up just seem incredibly large. I mean, the 24 trillion events is 230 odd million a second. I was just wondering if you're talking about sort of centralizing all of this work, what's the scale of infrastructure and what sort of systems is this running on? Because most of the people that I speak to are talking in hundreds of thousands, maybe millions a second, and this is 2 orders of magnitude larger than that.
Excellent question, and that essentially is what does the infrastructure look like to support such a large data set, right? And you've touched on one of my favorite topics, which is that of data gravity, actually. So in a nutshell, data and metadata about data is just going to keep on growing, right? So if we put it in the same place, then we're going to end up with these huge data lakes of information, which is going to take us an awfully long time to query. So from a security incident perspective, we really want to be thinking about what data is useful to us. So for example, inside Microsoft, we have something called the Graph API, which gives you all of your productivity data. If there's anything in there that we consider to be security related, it then comes out into another data lake, which we then can use the intelligent graph, I can't remember which way around it is, but anyway, the security graph API, right? So essentially it's in the cloud as well, because I don't think today that we can talk about having on-prem infrastructure for that sheer scale of data. And in fact, we've changed our language a little bit as well, because what we don't want to be doing is moving huge data sets to the analytics. We want to put the analytics where the data is. So we talk about edge computing and how we get that analytics up into the cloud. But essentially, the infrastructure is cloud, right? The scalability and the power of the cloud allows us to be able to gather this sort of data and move it through. And in fact, some of those data figures I can give to you afterwards, where they come from in terms of Geneva, which is really there to look at the Azure fabric, the health of the fabric, things like that. Skype area, there's an awful lot of different threads that we pull on to bring it together. But we do edge analytics where it's required, and then we move that telemetry, all that ontology of data, if you like, into another cloud to be able to look at it from a security perspective. Does that help?
Yes, I guess my question was, it is then decentralized. So my question was, it just seems absurd to have that as kind of one centralized view. So you do have to massively spread this out across, I assume, globally.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Well, and bear in mind, to the globally thing, there's something also called data sovereignty. So from a GDPR perspective, we wouldn't need to be thinking where the data is being held. But from the point of view of security, we do want to be able to pull those signals globally to be able to quickly detect when the attackers are doing something. Cool, thank you for the question.
We've got time for one more, if anybody wants to ask one. Okay, I've actually just got one through online. You must have seen some pretty catastrophic breaches in your time. Is there a common theme that connects them?
Ooh, short answer, yes. Passwords, get rid of them, we hate them. I think the fact that people don't, again, try to put the controls where the controls are required. So it's inevitably administrative users. Today with the cloud, where we have people who are maybe global administrators in one cloud, and we've got this multi-cloud strategy now, so they're also global administrators in AWS and GCP, and that essentially leads to a super user account, which we see the attackers are going for. So the problem is the detection of the fact that these attackers are inside the infrastructure. They're normally very noisy, right? When we talk about nation states attacks, even then they are very noisy, and we're just not picking up on the signals. So I think that the capability of being able to put those signals together into that platform approach of signals, I think that's one of my key recommendations, is start with a platform and then look to see where the capabilities gaps are and then use point solutions from that perspective. But those silos, they're not a good thing, right?
Okay, all right. That's all we've got time for from Lesley today, so please give her a hand. And
thank you all.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.